Hey Wargamers, I've been seeing a lot of posts lately from people excited about 10th edition, ready to come back to the hobby, ready to start the hobby for the first time maybe, and choosing Tau as their army of choice going into 10th edition. And they want to know what they should do ahead of the launch to get their army ready. And so this video is going to talk about what things you might want to consider in forming your first Tau force before 10th edition launches, before we know what 10th edition really is once we get our hands on it. And so the biggest thing to keep in mind is that the current publications will be void, right? So your codex, your data cards, all those expire on launch. They are not useful at all to you in the game. You know, that Games Workshop says, oh, well, you can get the codex for the art or for the lore. And that's true, but you can get those things other places without having to pay for it. So, you know, your publications are not going to be worth anything in 10th edition. Arcs of Omen books will still be relevant because they describe a play style, a game format that isn't tied specifically to game mechanic rules. So if you have Arcs of Omen book, that will stay the same, but your codex, your data cards, all your gaming supplies that you have from 9th edition really won't transfer over to 10th. So don't invest heavily in those. And for Tau, we don't expect there to be a major redesign or a major rework in the plans, right? We know that Marines, we know that Tyranids are both getting overhauled. We've seen Leviathan, we've seen a bunch of new kits for them, and there are probably more on the way. And so we know that those factions are getting a lot of attention at the beginning of the edition. We don't have a big reason to think Tau will get a similar treatment when it's their turn for a codex in the spring of 2024. So we don't think that there's going to be any major overhaul, partially because they've had a few big releases in the past few editions, and so their range is in relatively a good place. There are still a few portions of the model range for Tau that could be reworked, that deserves some attention, but they're relatively isolated. It's not a sprawling component of the army. Specifically, I'm talking about Kroot need additional kits. We got the Kroot, Farstalker, Kindred as a kill team, which we would expect to be released independently. We have Vespid that deserve a rework. They're currently in Finecast and really do need to be put into plastic. And so maybe we see some isolated drops here, but it's not going to be the entire range that gets redone. And so if you're asking yourself, what do I do if I want to start Tau before 10th edition hits? Really, it comes down to a personal decision about how you value the next couple, maybe few months of play, right? We don't have that long until 10th edition. And so it really is about how you want to invest in just a short period of play compared to the much longer period of play that you'll get once 10th edition hits. And so in general, I suggest that you focus on the hobby and save your money for models and for paints and things like that, things that won't become obsolete as soon as the new edition hits. So, you can start by picking up models that you want to have in your army, and it doesn't matter exactly what those models are. Just get your ball going. As far as rules go, you can use other resources for rules, right? There are other ways that you can get rules. Plenty of websites, apps that have the majority of the rules within them, and so you can use those resources for the next month or two, right? And skirt by. Then when the actual edition drops, then you can pick up the free PDF that Games Workshop is releasing with all the index rules that will update on 10th edition. And when the codex drops, you can feel free to pick that up. So, save your money for those things. But all that said, there are a few unit types, right? So there are a few different types of things you want to keep in mind if you're a burgeoning Tau player. In general, I think there are 3 things to keep in mind if you're new to the hobby or new to Tau as a faction. The first thing is that the current game rules, again, are going to be irrelevant soon. So the most important rule is not the rule in the current codex. The rule of cool is the most important rule, right? So buy models that make you happy, regardless of what they do on the tabletop, regardless of whether they're in meta or not. Buy models that you think look cool, that make you happy. And if you have those, then you will be invested in the faction, you'll be invested in the hobby, you will find your time with the army more enjoyable, and it will build a good hobby base. So really, anytime I make one of these how to start videos, I always try to emphasize that you should start with the models that you like, because that's what the game is about. You could find other ways to play without the models, but it really is about the models. So get the models that you like, right? It's simple as that. If you're pretty happy with a wide diversity of models, then there's some additional considerations that we can make, right? So in particular, units that have been routinely staples in past codices are a safer bet. They're not a safe bet. Things could always change. They could be favored or disfavored in the current or future rule set. And so there are trends, though, that we can see about what types of units we see showing up time and time again in the codex, and what Games Workshop might perceive as core units, or units that really form the identity of the faction that we might expect to have reasonably good value in the new edition. And so things like Fire Warriors, Commanders, Crisis Battlesuits are common top-tier units across editions and across codices. Riptides fall into that category. Broadsides fall into that category as well. You see, Battlesuits, Fire Warriors, Commanders show up, time and time again. And so if you like any of those models, go for those, right? They're probably going to show up in some form in your army in 10th edition. We do get previews about what the faction is going to look like in the new edition. We get previews about, game rules and all that stuff, right? And Warhammer community has done a great job putting out hype for the new edition. And they have been since, for the past few editions, really, right? They've been doing a really good job of this. The thing is about those previews is they are presenting the game in the best possible light. They are telling you in part what you want to hear, what they think you want to hear. And so they are often unrepresentative or a little hyperbolic about what actually the relative strength or efficacy of a particular strategy might be. So, we can look at the new, at the previews, we can look at the faction focus and get a sense about what things might be like, but oftentimes, when it actually comes time to building an army in the edition, it looks different than you might expect based on those previews. So keep that in mind. Those can be a little unrepresentative of the game as a whole once the edition hits. And so if you're looking to pick up these types of models, if you can find one of the old Start collecting boxes, that's still an awesome box. The new boarding patrol box is essentially the same thing, but it has Farsight in it instead of Ethereal. I debate about even putting this on here because I think you have more of a chance finding the old Start collecting box than the boarding patrol box. It was that bad. But the more available option is the combat patrol box. That has some stuff in it that hasn't necessarily been the meta pick in a lot of cases, haven't really been staples of the army, but one of the things about 10th edition is that it's going to have a combat patrol format that's specifically tuned for these box sets. And so I think if you're starting Tau, you probably wouldn't be in a bad place by picking up the combat patrol box because you have a more balanced version of the game to play with that, and the models are, pretty sweet, right? The Ghost Kill is one of the best Tau kits Games Workshop has ever made. Of course, now Farsight has taken that crown because that model is just slick as can be. But Ghost Kill, is definitely top 3 models in the Tau range. And so if you can get one of those in this nice box set, I don't think that's a bad thing. And finally, if you're thinking about these models and looking at how they might play, keep in mind that the rules tend to change a lot, right? Like exactly how many points it's worth, what the strength profile is, how many wounds it has, all those things. Those are relatively flexible, but the identity of the unit changes a lot less, right? Stealth suits are never going to be, your like heavy weapons platforms, right? They're meant to be stealth suits. Ghost Kills are meant to be, Ghost Kills. Riptides and Crisis Suits and Crude and all these things, right? Every unit has its own identity and has largely stayed inside that energy and identity. It, fluctuates a little bit in terms of how that's actually defined. I think the biggest example of that is Crude, but really, if we're looking at most of the units, they mostly stay the same type of unit, right? You use them in the same way. And so you can select units that fit your play style regardless of their actual rules. If you like the idea of a stealth cadre, a stealth army, pick up stealth suits and ghost scales. If you want swarms of infantry, pick up crude and fire warriors. If you want, army of battle suits, pick up crisis suits and riptides and commanders, right? Do that sort of thing, right? Because we know that how they will function, it's just a matter of the specific mechanics that they have. So, pick something that appeals to you play style, strategy-wise, not necessarily in terms of the specific tactics or anything like that. All right, so those are some things I think you should keep in mind if you're starting Tau before 10th edition. Hopefully this is insightful or helpful. If you think not, let's have a conversation about it in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you want to pick up one of the Invasive Wargaming models before they become unavailable, head on over to the Invasive Wargaming Etsy store in the description below. Also, if you like this video, you should know that it is made possible by my kind sponsor, the Magnet Baron, as well as the excellent folks over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel, you can certainly hop on over there and join our community. Special thanks to Shifty, Durza, Everett Keller, Stephen Cowan, Jack Inacker, Jared Egler, and Scott Heater.